Hi, everyone. Just repeating an earlier message. We will begin very, very shortly. We just have lots of people just coming in as we've just opened the webinar. So we will begin in a minute or two. Thank you so much. Great. We already have over 100 people joining us, so I think we should begin the webinar now. Hello, everyone, and good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you're joining us from. Welcome to the online event, New Frontiers in the Fight Against Environmental and Wildlife Crimes, organized by the Global Initiative Against Transnational Organized Crime, as part of the Ecosolve project funded by the European Union. My name is Finn. I'm a journalist and host of The Index, a podcast based on the Global Organized Crime Index, and I'm very happy to be facilitating today's event. Now, before we start, let me just go through a couple of housekeeping rules. Number one, the event is mainly in English, but we have simultaneous translations in Spanish and Portuguese. Now, to get that, you just need to click on the globe icon at the bottom of your Zoom window, and then you can choose the language that you want. I'd also request our speakers to speak a bit slowly to help with the interpretation. And second, we have a Q&A box for attendees to ask questions to our panelists. Now that we've gotten that out of the way, let's get back to the task at hand, which is talking about environmental and wildlife crimes. Now, whenever we talk about organized crime, the first thing that probably comes to our mind is drugs, right? And these days we're hearing a lot more about cyber crimes and trafficking as well, but we don't often hear about environmental and wildlife crime. And why is that the case? Is it because they don't happen? Or is it because they're hidden? And if so, how do we track them down and fight them? Well, today we are going to be exploring new tools as well as a new strategic direction to fight these crimes. And we have a fantastic lineup of speakers who are going to be sharing their insights and findings from their latest research. Now, today's event is broadly in two parts. The first part will look at data and the role that it can play in combating environmental and wildlife crimes. And the second part will focus on the linkages between corruption and environmental crime. We will also hear from two community-led and community-based initiatives about their work on the front lines. Now, without much further ado, I'd like to welcome Mark Shaw, Director of GI-TOC, who will be giving the keynote introduction. Mark?
All right, and thank you very much, and hello, everybody. I think Keynote's introduction sounds too fancy for what I'm going to say, but I first want to welcome you to the webinar on New Frontiers in the Fight Against Environmental and Wildlife Crimes. And I assume, and I think it's fair to say, that everybody on this call is concerned about the destruction of our planet and the impact that it has on natural habitats, on flora and fauna, on the quality of our air, on climate, and a long string of related issues. From our perspective, we often feel that environmental crime in the multiple illicit markets that the initiative is dealing with receives insufficient attention, particularly from politicians, from law enforcement, and from the private sector. And like so many forms of crime, it's hidden. It occurs in faraway and remote places, and it manifests itself in ways that some people would consider as a way of life rather than an illicit economy. That makes it even more challenging to confront as a policy issue. Another challenge I think that all of you are aware of is that the victims are often not heard. Indigenous people, people living in remote communities, even, I suppose, Mother Nature herself, or particularly Mother Nature herself. And the little information that becomes public comes from a relatively small number of brave environmental activists or investigative journalists who are often under threat. And the scale and the harms of environmental crime therefore don't get the attention that they deserve, and the debates around them can often be misunderstood. And at the Global Initiative, we are trying to do our own small part in changing that. And thanks to support from the European Union, we launched Ecosolve, a program looking at a number of specific areas in and around the environmental crime debate, and that will run for the next couple of years. It's one of our flagship programs funded by the European Union alongside ENACT and other pieces of work that we are doing in this sector. One of Ecosolve's key objectives is to develop a clearer picture of the extent and nature of the problem, using and exploiting the interplay between humans and technology and the data that comes from that, but also the degree to which we can identify areas for intervention to make a difference. And that includes building smart global databases on wildlife trafficking and reporting on global trends. And you'll hear more about this in the meeting. We've recently launched a global trends report and a global monitoring system that will be covered, as I say, in the meeting today. And we are also seeking to expose evidence of elite corruption, and the project resources several efforts and stories to do that. Elite corruption behind environmental crime, analyzing supply chains, and seeking to identify who are the high-level facilitators who work at the intersection of the licit and the illicit. Can the project expose all cases? Of course not, but by taking on particular cases and exposing them to highlight who is involved, how money flows, and who benefits. And one of the panels today will look at how corruption protects and enables environmental crime. I think a key and often an underexplored area. Another major theme for us as the initiative in the context of environmental crime and of course organized crime more generally is strengthening the resilience of communities who are in harm's way or are very present or in the context around which organized crime and illicit activities occur. And a lot of what we're trying to do is empower local communities to stand up to organized crime. And that's a big ask, actually, in many places, because the threats that follow both from state and non-state criminal actors can be extreme. And we'll hear from some activists here in the context of the webinar, and those are people at the front lines doing very courageous work in attempting to save our planet. And again, to emphasize what a small number of people are often involved in doing this work. So there are so many topics to cover, so many good speakers. I want to wish you a really good discussion. We are proud to be able to make our own small contribution to this discussion, and we want to, as an initiative, continue to provide a platform to bring people together as part of many other initiatives to respond to the challenges that we face as a global community, and indeed in many local communities. Thank you, Tin. And with that, I'll hand over to the acting head of Ecosolve, Louise Taylor, to expound more on the process and what we will cover.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you for joining us today as well, and welcome us all online. There are so many of you who've joined us today, I think over 230 at the last count, to hear about these new frontiers in the fight against environmental crime. It really feels as though there is some movement and energy and dynamism on this agenda. And frankly, it's fantastic to be part of it and to be supporting it in whatever way we can. And that's what today is fundamentally about. So we want to explore some of the more or the most innovative parts of the Ecosolve program. We're going to talk about data, and I promise you it will be in an exciting and dynamic way. Mark, you mentioned that the lack of awareness of the scale and impact and harms of these crimes is a large part of why, until now, these particular threats have gone unnoticed or ignored. And I completely agree. And Ecosolve is specifically designed to address exactly that conundrum. How do we get more data, more information, more analysis, and more engagement on this threat of environmental crimes? So in the first part of today's webinar, we'll show you the new parts of the Ecosolve website that showcase the data in a digestible way for all of us. This data visualization has been really creatively designed to be both easily accessible, but also visually stimulating. It's going to enable and encourage people of all different stakeholders to explore and examine the data in new and more efficient ways. And the global trend report that you mentioned, Mark, I mean, it draws on some fascinating data from our liaison hubs in Brazil and South Africa. It's a must read, frankly, for anyone who's ever questioned the convergence of environmental crimes with other organized crime. And you'll hear more about that shortly. But really importantly, and this is another kind of fundamental driver of Ecosolve, how do we use this data to engineer more action, more response, more resilience to these crimes? So in our second session, we will explore the other innovative arms of Ecosolve, as you said. They both address the question of people in different ways. Firstly, criminal ones. How can we explore exposure of these criminal actors and use their data to enhance action and intervention and response and reaction? But then, good news, ending on a more positive note, exploring how community actors and representatives can really make a difference in the fight against organized crime and their innovative use of data to do so too. Speaking of people and making a difference, I did want to quickly thank a few people, or rather actually many people. So of course, the EU and the Global Illicit Flows Programme for their continued support and engagement. We're a very proud partner of the programme. I also wanted to thank others as well for their part and their contributions in getting Ecosolve to this point, but more importantly, in insisting that environmental crime takes more precedence and becomes a more pressing priority for everyone. You mentioned, Mark, that we'll hear from many excellent people today, and I completely agree. Really looking forward to hearing from the colleagues, both from within and without the GI, with whom we've been working to develop these different strands of work. I would also note there are so many people behind the scenes contributing their analysis, their challenge, their expertise and engagement to different levels of working group meetings, investigative reporting, multilateral events and meetings. So a big thank you to everybody who's contributing to this. And thank you very much for making it, as I said, one of the most pressing items on our agenda today. And we really anticipate and hope that Ecosolve and its many tools, innovations, and interventions support you in your efforts. So without further ado, let's hear more about those tools and innovations and interventions. We're excited to share them with you today and look forward to your engagement and challenge on all of those things going forwards. Finn, back to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mark and Louise, for your introductory remarks, for setting the scene about what you're going to be hearing today, but also in the future from Ecosolve. We're going to have a presentation on the website that Louise explained, but first, we are going to have a short video about the global monitoring system. And that's Ecosolve's solution to monitoring and understanding the online illegal wildlife trade. Can we have the video, please? And we apologize in advance if the video is a little bit grainy. You can find a higher res version on the website. Thank you.
How can a network of data gatherers stop wildlife being trafficked online? Ecosolve introduces the Global Monitoring System, an initiative aimed at collecting and analyzing data from social media and e-commerce sites so that it can be used to disrupt criminal markets. The data collected will be shared with national, regional, and international law enforcement agencies and private internet companies to aid their fight against environmental crime. In addition to these direct impacts, we hope the data shared will be used in advocacy campaigns. such as to lobby politicians to take action on issues like wildlife trafficking. We hope it will be used by conservationists to demonstrate the threats posed to endangered species by illicit trade. And we hope that it will be used to inform policy decisions, such as whether to regulate online commerce and social media to prevent its misuse by criminals. A network of data hubs collecting this data will be the foundation of the global monitoring system. Monitoring diverse wildlife trades online and processing the information. These hubs will be strategically located based on criteria: high levels of environmental crime, high levels of internet use, together with the presence of illicit online markets, commitment from authorities to crack down on online illicit trade and/or wildlife crime. Selected countries include Brazil, Colombia, Indonesia, Thailand, Nigeria, and South Africa. More will be added in key regions as the project develops. The GMS will enhance the cyber patrolling capacity of law enforcement agencies responding to online illicit markets. The system will also support international data sharing community, enhancing the knowledge base, improving global cooperation, and disrupting transnational illicit flows of protected wildlife and timber. Uniting the world against illicit environmental flows with the power of the global monitoring system.
Thank you for that video. We're now going to hear from Yana O, founder of data and design consultancy Thebe, and a fellow Burmese who has been working with Ecosolve and The Continentalist to develop an interactive public-facing website that Louise was just talking about. And the website is based on data from the GMS, and it provides both the public and practitioners alike with the means to understand the global trends in the online illegal wildlife trade. Yan, over to you to take us through the website, its functions, how to navigate it, and best use it.
Thank you, Martin. First of all, I'd like to thank the Global Initiative for giving me the opportunity to share about the project that we've collaborated on with our partners at the Continentalist. So as Tin was saying, I'm the founder of Thebe, a data and design studio based in Southeast Asia. And we embarked on this project together with our partners at Continentalist, who are also a data storytelling studio based out of Singapore in the earlier parts of this year. And over the course of the past 8 months, we've designed and developed the Global Monitoring System website together with the esteemed professionals at the Global Initiative. We've brainstormed with them on how to process the data, how to present the data in a way that is the most impactful for the audience that will be using and accessing the data. So without further ado, I would like to share my screen to walk through the features of the website. I hope you can all see my screen.
Yes, we can. Thanks, Yan.
Yep. So ecosolve.eco is the URL of the website. And right at from the get-go, you can see the main page, which has a design that lets you go and explore the various parts of the website. So first you have the link to the data dashboard portion of it, also known as the global monitoring system. In addition to that, we have a page for the analysis, which features all the reports and multimedia presentations that the team at Global Initiative have prepared for the Ecosolve project. And also for users to be able to learn more about the project, we also have an about page. So to start off with, this is the information contained. Oh, hello.
Sorry to interrupt you. Some of the attendees are saying if you could speak up a bit louder.
Oh, sorry.
Yep. Perfect. Thank you.
This is better now? Yeah. So first of all, I'll be showing the about page where you can see the general information about the project, why the project has come to be, links to the report, and description of the activities that are taking place under the project, as well as a quick short video introducing the project. Next, let me guide you through the analysis portion of the website. Here, we can see links to reports and publications and multimedia that the Global Initiative team has prepared, which can also be found on the main website, but this is replicated here so that people coming to the website specifically, to the Ecosolve website, can have access to the same information as well. And finally, the main portion of the website, which, as Louise was mentioning, is the data dashboard. So the data for this project comes in the form of individual advertisements for illicit wildlife trafficking that is prepared by the Global Initiative team and sourced from all the different hubs that was being talked about in the video. So in order to visualize the data that is being gathered, the Continentalist team and the DB team decided to have 4 different data visualizations that are interactive and filterable to be able to present the data in a way that showcases all these different properties. So first of all, we have the visualization called the species swatch, which has a series of what's called tree map diagrams that shows the individual species that are being displayed on the online wildlife markets. So they are grouped by the taxonomies, so mammals, birds, marine, reptiles, and amphibians. And you can see for each taxonomy the different adverts that have come up for the different species. Secondly, we have a data visualization that tracks the different species and in which markets they end up being sold in. So this is a Sankey diagram that starts off with the types of species that are being posted on the advertisements, whether or not we're talking about a live specimen or part of the animal, and then finally, where it flows to. So currently, the data being gathered as the project is kicking off is all in Brazil and South Africa. But as was mentioned in the video, there'll be more hubs that will come online as we go on. Thirdly, we have the trend monitor visualization, which is a series of area charts that shows over time for each species how many adverts are being shown. So the data that we currently have covers the 4 months from May to August inclusive. And as time goes on and other hubs come online, this data set is destined to grow and cover more species and more issues. Last but not least, we have the full data set available in the form of an interactive table where you can look at the websites in which these advertisements are shown, the species that are being trafficked, the types of the products, which country is being sold in, the taxonomy, and the language of the advertisement, as well as the date in which it's being posted. So this is the main dashboard page. And for each of the visualizations, we have a separate page that lets you dig into more detail. Before that, I would like to demonstrate the filter properties that are available throughout the website. So we wanted to make sure that this data visualization presented both an explorable interface, so people who are specifically interested in particular species, particular countries, and particular platforms can filter those issues, and also provides insights that are automatically calculated as more data comes in. So for each data visualization is accompanied by insights that are automatically calculated, as you can see here. So I'll demonstrate the filter functionality. So for example, let's say we want to look at the ads that are found on Facebook. And when we do that, all the visualizations will filter to just show the data coming from Facebook. And on top of that, if we want to add a second filter, let's say to show only the ads that are coming from Brazil, you have the data visualizations additionally filtered as follows. And then on top of that, let's say you want to highlight a particular species, such as the African gray parrot, and then you'll have, just like you have in an Excel file or an Excel table, you can filter all the way across different categories. So I'll remove these for now, and then let's jump into the species watch. In each of the detailed visualizations, you have highlights that are automatically calculated, as I was mentioning before. It has links to the relevant reports and the detailed methodology and instructions on how to read the visualizations. Highlighting on each of the parts of the visualizations will show details about the number of adverts. And then just like on the main page, you can filter based on the type of species that you want to see. So let's say if you look at elephants, then it will highlight the species as requested. So next, let's dive into the market tracker. And here on the market tracker, similarly to the other visualizations, you have the highlights of the specific points that will be useful for the users. And you have a little bit more functionality here than what you have on the desktop, on the main dashboard. So here you can switch between the destination countries and the platforms that is being trafficked through. So for example, we can look at Facebook, and then we can see what are the species coming in to be advertised on Facebook. And then from there, we can look at, from Facebook, how many are in each of the different markets that are being shown. Moreover, you can also filter. So for example, if we want to filter not just Facebook, but also Gumtree, which is the small, one of the smallest platforms, it will also filter as you have chosen. That will let you make comparisons on the fly between different platforms. Similarly, you can select two species at the same time. Let's say we want to select elephants, and then you want to compare them with the gray parrots, and then you can see both at the same time. Next, let us go to the trend monitor, which shows the time series data. Here, you can filter by looking at all types of products, or just the live animals, or the parts of different animals. And beyond that, right now, there's only 4 months of data, so it's clear to see all 4 months at one go. But as time goes on, when we have more months, it will become such that it'll be more convenient to be able to narrow down the time frame that you would want to look at. So we have a filter up here that allows us to filter just the months that we want to look at. Moreover, we have the final visualization, which lets you see all the details of the entire data set in the searchable and filterable table. So here, let's say you want to search for elephants, and then you can type in the first letters of what the search term, and the table already filters for that. There's also advanced filtering, which lets you filter by all the different variables that are available, by species, platform, animal group, so on and so forth. So let's say we want to filter just for birds, and then we'll apply here, and then it will filter just for birds. In each of the data visualizations, there are links to download the entire database, which will get more and more filled up as time goes on. Currently, there are over 700 entries. So you can download the data set in a CSV file in the spirit of openness and sharing all the data that has been gathered. And that concludes the tour of all the different parts of the website. And I'm happy to take questions. Over to you, Mate.
Great. Thank you so much, Jan, for taking us through that and showing all that the website can do. I hope everyone who's attending it is excited to utilize it and use it for their work as well. We're now going to be hearing from Nina Kaiser, who will speak about some of the key findings of the latest global trend report on monitoring the illegal wildlife trade online. Now, Nina is head of data at GI-TOC and lead of the Ecosolve workstream on data and tech for disruption. Nina, over to you.
Thank you, Tin. Hi, everyone. It's very exciting to see that so many people have joined us and are interested in the topic. As Tin just mentioned, my name is Nina Kaiser, and I lead the Ecosolve workstream on data and tech for disruption. And as part of this workstream, we are building the global monitoring system to monitor the online illegal wildlife trade in various parts of the world, as you've just heard in the video presented earlier. And the Global Trend Report is the outcome of these monitoring efforts for May to July 2024 in 2 countries, Brazil and South Africa. So before I go into some of the key findings of the latest Global Trend Report, next slide, please. A few words about what we're actually trying to do with the Global Trend Report series. Throughout the course of the Ecosolve project, we are publishing 8 global trend reports on monitoring online illegal wildlife trade to present and analyze trends in the online trade, drawing on the results from the GMS, the Global Monitoring System, as well as to provide in-depth analysis and case studies. Each trend report follows a similar structure. The first section discusses the latest trends as a result of regular monitoring, and the following 2 to 3 sections then present deep dives contextualizing some of these trends by discussing, for example, law enforcement efforts, changes in regulations, as well as individual case studies. And while the first global trend report focused on more general trends, which we published in June 2024, focused on more general trends in online monitoring efforts regarding regulations and law enforcement, the second global trend report, which I'll be presenting here today, for the first time showcases findings and insights from regular monitoring of our first 2 data hubs, Brazil and South Africa. The first section presents trends, as all of these first sections will do, presents trends in online illegal wildlife trade based on regular monitoring from May to July 2024. The second section analyzes the illegal trade in pirarucu in Brazil, while the third section discusses the illegal trade in African traditional medicines in South Africa. Next slide, please. Now, a few words about what and how we are actually monitoring online illegal wildlife trade. In the context of this project, online wildlife trafficking refers to the illegal trade in protected wildlife species and their derivatives facilitated through online platforms and digital means. It encompasses a wide range of activities, including the sale of live animals, exotic pets, animal parts, and products derived from endangered species. We're primarily looking at e-commerce and social media platforms, searching for illegal trade in a select number of protected species. Searches are conducted in local languages and English. Monitoring is currently undertaken primarily manually, but with time, we are planning to automate some of the processes using an AI-enabled web scraper we are building as part of the Ecosolve project. Data hubs, which are the foundation of the global monitoring system, are established progressively, and at the end of the project, we will have more than 10 data hubs in key locations around the world. Next slide. Now, turning to some of the findings presented in the first section of the Global Trend Report, a total of 477 advertisements were found in Brazil and South Africa, which is most certainly an undercount, given the monitoring efforts focused on a select number of species and platforms. So one can only expect that the actual online illegal wildlife trade is substantially larger than this figure. Out of these 477 ads, the majority were found in Brazil, with 55%, where much of the trade was driven by online illegal wildlife trade in pirarucu, which is a type of freshwater fish. Most of its trade is for consumption, primarily in the form of salted meat, as well as clothing, for example, in the form of boots or purses. In South Africa, on the other hand, the findings suggest that the online trade is driven by the illegal trade in African grey parrots, which accounted for the majority of ads in the country. Here, most of the trade takes place in the form of live birds. Next slide. Looking at a breakdown of the figures by platform, and you've just seen that graph earlier in Jan's presentation on the website, suggests that in line with previous research on online illegal wildlife trade, most of the trade is taking place on social media platforms, with around 78% compared to e-commerce platforms. So as you can see here, just go back, yeah. As you can see here, the red the column, right? The red column is larger than the blue column, so that means more ads were found on social media than e-commerce. What is interesting is that social media platforms are not just the main vehicle for online illegal wildlife trade, but that the diversity of species advertised is much greater on social media compared to e-commerce platforms, as you can see here as well on the graph. And you can obviously explore all of this on the website later on as well, or it's also presented in the trend report. Next slide, please. Finally, an analysis of key terms used in ads also reveals that private messaging apps, such as WhatsApp, for example, as you can see here highlighted, continue to play an important role in the online illegal wildlife trade. In many cases, sellers advertise on e-commerce or social media platforms, redirecting interested buyers to private messaging groups for further information or to close a deal. So the bigger, just go back to that. Yeah. So the larger the word, the more often the term was found in the advertisements. Next slide, please. The second section of the report provides a deep dive into the illegal trade of piracu in Brazil. Piracu are one of the world's largest scaled freshwater fish. They can grow up to 3 meters long and 200 kilometers in weight. Due to overfishing, they were included in CITES Appendix 2 in 1975 and are protected under national law in Brazil, at least in some of the states. Local policy instruments, for example, community-based fishing agreements, have been implemented to impede the extinction of the species. And while conservation policies help to re-establish fish stock, piracu are still threatened by illegal activities. As you can see here on this map, which illustrates the geographical distribution of piracu seizures across municipalities in Brazil, the illegal trade in piracu remains a big issue. And as you can see, much of the illegal trade takes place in the Amazon basin, a region to which piracu are native. This corresponds to our findings from online monitoring, as I've mentioned earlier. Online monitoring for May to July this year suggests that in Brazil, the online illegal wildlife trade is also driven by the trade in piracu. The trade in piracu is highly profitable. So while prices found in online ads range widely, the most highly valued item was a purse, which was advertised for roughly 26% more than the monthly minimum wage in Brazil. Additional analysis of the online market, which included a network analysis, suggests further that the online trade in piracu is also highly organized. Next slide, please. Apart from thriving online markets, digging deeper into seizures data suggests that there is a strong correlation between piracu seizures and cocaine seizures, as illustrated in this map. This is a topic that has been flagged by news reports in Brazil previously, but had not yet been tested empirically. Using monthly seizures data for 2022 to 2024 for 62 municipalities, the state of Amazon, our analysis found that municipalities with at least one seizure of piracu have 61% more cocaine seizures than municipalities with no piracu seizures. Furthermore, each additional piracu seizure is correlated with 90% more cocaine seizures. This relationship between the illegal trade in piracu and the cocaine trade corresponds with the finding I mentioned previously that the market is highly organized, whether that's online or offline. Next slide, please. The third section of the report dives into an analysis of the illegal trade in African traditional medicine in South Africa. Online monitoring for South Africa found 61 ads for suspected animal parts and derivatives potentially linked to African traditional medicine. This accounts for about 13% of all wildlife ads found in South Africa during the same time period. Ads that were found online did not just include animal parts and derivatives, but also live pangolins, for example. The use of animals and animal-derived products in African traditional medicine is central to many indigenous cultures in South Africa. They're used to heal physical ailments and are also used for spiritual purposes, such as attaining good fortune or fixing broken relationships. While the illegal use of wildlife in African traditional medicine markets in South Africa, as well as African traditional medicine markets outside of Africa, are significantly smaller than international traditional medicine markets, its contribution to the illegal wildlife trade warrants a multifaceted response. This market sits at a complex intersection of constitutionally protected rights to practice culture, the role played by traditional healers and others, the need to protect and conserve indigenous wildlife, and the challenges of enforcing the law, both offline and online, where the relevant agencies are understaffed and underfunded. Although plants and animals are often sold at physical markets, sellers and African traditional medicine practitioners have taken to e-commerce and social media platforms to advertise their products and services. Data from the GMS monitoring of these online markets for illegal wildlife trade activity raises fresh concerns about their regulation. Next slide, please. Many of the species used in African traditional medicine, which were also found for sale online, are on the IUCN Red List and included under the CITES Treaty, indicating that they are already at risk due to trade and other threats. However, CITES is concerned with international trade. It does not address national markets like South Africa's African traditional medicine market. There are various pieces of legislation and regulations in South Africa concerning wildlife trade. However, despite the extensive legislative frameworks established by national and provincial laws to regulate traditional medicinal practices and the trade in wild animals, illegal trade within this market remains inadequately controlled. This persistent issue is particularly problematic at the provincial level, where enforcement bodies lack sufficient personnel and funding to effectively implement and uphold existing regulations. The variety of provincial legislative frameworks, some of which are still being brought into line with CITES, adds a further complication. In turn, African traditional medicine practitioners, traders, and consumers are insufficiently aware of the regulations and the associated penalties, which include fines and imprisonment. Next slide, please. So bringing all this research together, some of the key recommendations that came out of the analysis and are for one, in the context of African traditional medicine in South Africa, we've just discussed at the end, the promotion of substitutes is a promising strategy in what needs to be a broader multilateral approach to address illegal wildlife consumption in traditional medicine. This will include legislation and law enforcement, regulated social media platforms, and increased awareness, but ultimately it will require the collaboration and multiple perspectives of traditional healers, multi-gatherers and traders, conservation practitioners from academia and civil society, and policymakers and law enforcement officials. Second, in the context of the illegal trade in piracu in Brazil, the analysis has shown that the integration of intelligence and data, such as data, for example, from Ecosolve GMS and network analysis, is a powerful combination to identify and combat illegal wildlife trade. Lastly, the research also highlights that determining the legality of online advertisements is challenging but essential. The use of contextual evidence is needed to identify online illegal wildlife trade when direct evidence of illegality is lacking. These recommendations are, of course, based on our own research or on the research of the data hubs that I've presented here. And we would very much appreciate any further views you might have in terms of recommendations given your own experiences. Last slide, please. Now, as I mentioned before, this is the second report in a series of 8 global trend reports that will be published in the course of this project. The next report is to be published in January 2025 and will include insights into monitoring efforts for more countries since we're establishing more data hubs. So that will include Thailand and possibly also India and the UAE. In the meantime, please take a look at our website, which will be updated on a monthly basis, presented by Jan just before. And the website presents the key data findings from the Ecosolve data hubs monitoring efforts of online illegal wildlife trade. Thank you very much. And yeah, if you have any questions, please post them in the chat.
Great. Thank you so much for that, Nina. I really appreciate it. And for explaining all the nuances and complexities around all that numbers and data, right? There are already lots of questions actually coming through the Q&A, and quite a lot of them have to do with the methodology as well. So perhaps you and your team can have a look, and also some of them can be actually answered online, you know, in the Q&A itself. So we've just heard from lots of speakers about the fact that the illegal wildlife trade continues to thrive on online platforms, right? And part of this is because this has historically been a low priority area for law enforcement and governments, especially compared to other illicit markets like the trafficking of drugs or arms. And the fact that most countries also don't have regulations around illegal wildlife trade further complicates the picture. So we're delighted to welcome our first panel discussion with 3 experts who've been working on exactly these issues. Now I'm going to introduce you to them, and in the interest of fairness, I'm going to do this in alphabetical order based on their first names. So we have Jose Luis, who is the Chief Executive Officer of the Wildlife Trust of India. We have Lionel Hashiman, who is the Program Manager for Wildlife Crime at the International Fund for Animal Welfare, and Salvador Amato, who is the Law Enforcement and Organized Crime Consultant at Ecosolve. Lionel, I'd like to actually start with you first, because your organization, the IFAW, collaborates with law enforcement to curb the online illegal wildlife trade in Europe as well as in other places. And your organization is also involved in the Coalition to End Illegal Wildlife Trade Online, which is a partnership between NGOs and online platforms that are promoting self-regulation. Can you tell us about the trends that you're seeing in your jurisdictions when it comes to illegal wildlife trade online, and what new directions they're heading?
Thank you, Finn, and hello, everyone. It's nice to have you there. That's actually a very good question. That's usually the 1 million question. We are trying to always know what's happening, so then we can react and tailor our approach to tackle wildlife crime. So the main point with that is, and this has been mentioned in the chat, actually, wildlife cybercrime or wildlife crime online is very hard to detect, also because just of the question of the legality versus illegality. And this is something that is always evolving, happening 24/7 across the globe. So I'm trying to give you just some very high-level information, keeping in mind this is very depending on the region, the context, the species, the platform. So this would be true for a species that would only be traded in one specific platform in one specific country, and this might change even with the same species in other country or part of the world. So the main parts, I think that is something that we're seeing is there is more and more demand and for exotic pets, and consequently exotic pets being trafficked all across the world, different from depending on the part of the world, but you can think of reptiles, birds, big cats, obviously, primates and others. And something I would like to highlight is we're not only talking about CITES species, but also non-CITES species that are very often traded under the radar. Another part is that, and to answer the question, try to stay under my time limit also, is we have seen over the last few years a move from the species being trafficked mostly from e-commerce platforms to now being more and more trafficked and sold through social media. We're talking here even more around closed groups, to a messaging app. You can think of WhatsApp, WeChat, and so on. And also the specialized platforms where people will directly go that are only selling specific type of exotic pets. And lastly, but that goes with also the fact that this is always evolving, always trying to find new approach that would avoid law enforcement detections, is through all new social media platform or online platforms, so that there is a need to always stay on the edge and to have these both global and local pictures to understand what's happening.
Great, thank you for that, Lionel. That's quite a complex, complicated, and requires constantly being on top of things, right? So I'd like to come to you next, because you're a law enforcement liaison with Ecosolve, and you've been working as a law enforcement officer for many, many years, primarily on the illegal wildlife trade. Tell us a bit about the role of enforcement when it comes to dealing with these emerging trends, and is there capacity for law enforcement to be dealing with this as well? Because I'm assuming that this is just one of the many, many things that they've had to deal with.
Thank you, Tin. And thank you, everyone. It's great to see this level of interest in these topics. So to answer your question, when you do, I think it's very important to recognize that when you talk about the role of law enforcement and the capacity of law enforcement to address these types of issues, you have to recognize that the analytical capacity dedicated to looking at, in particular, online wildlife trade still very much sits with civil society organizations like the GI-TOC and like our partners on this call, IFWA, the Environmental Investigation Agency, Traffic, Wildlife Justice Commission, frankly, to name just a few. So that's where the analytical capacity sits. And I recall almost a decade ago helping to facilitate a webinar with Interpol on tiger rank country analysts. And at that time, the analytical capacity in NGOs and civil society organization was clearly almost 10 to 1 in terms of range countries looking at what law enforcement had. And I don't think that dynamic has markedly changed. So there's still obviously a clear role for civil society organization, and there's still very much a need for this multi-sectoral approach to trying to address these crimes. That there are signs that this is changing. And I think in particular in places where the global monitoring system in Ecosolve is working, in particular in Thailand, there's a relatively new wildlife crime intelligence unit that has been set up by the Department of National Parks and Plant and Wildlife Conservation. In South Africa, there's a very well-established environmental enforcement fusion center that has actually a very well-established encrypted system to capture and collect information from external partners, analyze this, and then get it to the right law enforcement authorities to act on. But that's the key, is that the data is out there, the trends are being identified, posts are being identified, but this has to get to law enforcement, and law enforcement has to, one, consider it a priority and turn these information into investigations, which in turn hopefully result in appropriate sanctions and appropriate penalties, because you mentioned the dynamic of online trade, but the dynamic that runs illegal wild trade in general is it's still very high profit and very low risk. And the only way to change that is that investigations and law enforcement start making this a higher risk activity for these traders.
Great, thanks for that, Sal. And good news about Thailand and the new unit that they've set up and what they're trying to do as well. Jose, you've also been working on this topic in India for a very, very long time. So given your vast experience, what are some of the key challenges that you would say law enforcement is facing when it comes to tackling this issue?
Thank you, Tin, for the question. And of course, collecting data is one thing, and turning it to intelligence and ensuring that this digital identities are actually identified and the trafficked animal is rescued or the product is seized is very important. So in our experience in India, I'm very glad and very, very happy to say that the cybercrime investigation started, say, in 2011, as far as I can remember, by the National Wildlife Crime Control Bureau. And the challenges which were there and which are still there is the vast type of things like what we are getting online is very, very, very interesting in India, because a lot of species are traded from India. At the same time, we get a lot of things coming into India. And considering that we have a large population and a lot of internet usage, the connectivity between the buyer and the seller is very quick. So getting into this network, Lionel actually addressed this issue, and my previous speakers also talked about it, that people use a number of platforms, like people meet up in Facebook, then they move to WeChat, sorry, not to WeChat in India, but to, WhatsApp or Telegram. So, they keep on changing the platform. So the major investigation challenge is first to track a suspect in this cyber space, that you identify an actual seller, because in our experience, in my team's experience, there are a number of players who come online who are fake traders. So you actually identify the trader, latch on him, and identify him in the cyberspace at multiple platforms. He's or she's operating in multiple platforms. And then the biggest challenge is to identify the person in real world. There you need a lot of technology, a lot of access to technology, a lot of skill sets, both human intelligence and tech intelligence, both we need that. And finally, when you get into the law enforcement, you may need to coordinate between multiple agencies, which is the police department, the cybersecurity department, the forestry department, and probably the ground operational units. Even you do the operation, then there is a challenge of handling all these evidences, because the operation is not just the end of the game, that, how to bring this person to justice. So the challenges are there about, the documentation, the evidence management, how you preserve the evidences or evidences in the devices which you collect, and also getting the platforms to respond. Because, for example, if a particular product was available on sale in a platform, getting the company responsible for the act, and also getting their support in evidence. So these are vast challenges which we face, because many a times the servers are not in the country. I'm absolutely sure this is the same for every country. So that complexity is the challenge, and this challenge can be only managed, or this challenge can be challenged only by good coordination and cooperation between agencies and civil society and technology companies, where they in real time they exchange information. That's a way forward.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Now, I have one question for all three of you before we open up. Now, this question for all three of you, and Jose, if you don't mind starting again, could you give us some recommendations, right, to the regulators and law enforcement to better tackle this issue, particularly the illegal wildlife trade online, and if you could keep your answers to 2 to 3 minutes, that would be great. So some of your top recommendations. Jose, I'd start with you first, and then I'll come over to Sal and with Lionel.
Yeah, my first recommendation is that any platform which is directly or indirectly facilitating the illegal wildlife trade online should be accountable for it, instead of them telling that, oh, we have a 14-page end user agreement, and that we free ourselves from the trade. It is the person who is posting. So any platform which is trading should be accountable for that. There should be laws. The second thing is that every platform can take measures, because today there is AI, there are various tools, should ensure that illegal wildlife trade is not permitted, or it is not encouraged in their platforms. So that should be done from the platform side. And the IT laws, the cyber laws of the country should ensure that anybody who is supporting the trade should be accountable for it. So that should be there. Then the need and the change is needed in the way the evidences are managed, because it's complicated documentation, and there could be a number of loopholes which should be managed through policies and other interventions to ensure that you don't need to get into too much of this technicality to prove somebody who was doing the trade online guilty. So that kind of simpler mechanisms should be in place. The other thing is that our judicial systems, especially in my country and our region, the judicial system should be sensitized towards this particular issue, because many of them don't consider some of those animals which are being traded as serious offense. So there should be policies, there should be laws which will ensure that these crimes are taken seriously. I think that is my preliminary recommendations, and my major request for us that enforcement agencies, civil societies, and experts should have a platform and mechanisms for real-time information exchange. Sometimes protocols, formalities delay the transmission of vital intel from one party to another party. And let me wrap up with we were involved in instances where law enforcement agencies asked us to pass in. So there has to be proactive support from civil society also. That's all. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Jose. Sal? recommendations from you? You're still on mute, so.
Yes, one of the things I wanted to mention is that there's a lot of discussion in the question and answer here on how do we determine the legality or illegality of some of this trade, and as mentioned, it can be exceedingly difficult. One of the approaches that we're taking with the global monitoring system is to look at these ads, and we're looking at trying to feed law enforcement with what we call the more significant detections that we're seeing. So, you know, profiles that have multiple posts, and there's a pattern of commercial activity as opposed to one-offs postings. You know, the level of protection of the animals involved. Is there clear indications of illegality? And so we're not trying to overwhelm law enforcement with a wash of data. We're trying to provide them what we consider a highly significant, highly impactful online wildlife trade for their subsequent use. And I think that's just important to recognize, is that what we're sending to law enforcement beyond the trend reports and beyond the website data analysis is what we consider highly significant posts that represent patterns of criminal activity with regards to species that are of high concern and values that are, you know, significant.
Lionel?
Thanks. And to add to what has just been said, I would highlight 2 points that are very important, very crucial, but sometimes kind of overlooked, is to make sure that regulators allocate sufficient funding, obviously from civil society organizations that plays a key role in tackling wildlife crime online, but more importantly to law enforcement. Make sure they have sufficient resources, sufficient equipment. We're still in a world where many law enforcement agencies won't have enough laptops, work phones to do the work there. So I think there is definitely an important, it is important to put this emphasis on making sure enough prioritization and therefore resource allocation goes to supporting law enforcement agencies and also all of the other actors that are helping, that's including CSOs, including academia, including making sure we involve the private sector and provide them incentives to allocate more resources and bringing everyone together.
Great, thank you so much for your thoughts. We have a few minutes, about 5 to 10 minutes for Q&A, not only from these panelists that you just heard from, but also from all of the previous speakers. So if you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A box. I see that there's quite a lot that's already coming, and many are answering it in the Q&A itself as well. I do have a couple of questions that I think particularly, you know, Lionel and Jose, you might be able to answer perhaps. So I'm going to group some of them together. So there's a question around, you know, in terms of data collection, when you are collecting data, are you using keywords to search for trade? Or, you know, are you using data that's found in surface web searches, or are you using deep searches? So that's number one. Number two, there's also questions around, you know, whether can public contribute, like if they chance upon a trade or an ad or something that they see that seems to be illegal, can they, you know, can they submit, or can they alert you? As far as I know, Ecosolve doesn't, but perhaps partner organizations like yourself may be able to. So yeah, those 2 points, if you could touch on them, that would be great. Lionel, do you want to start first?
Yeah, sure. And the question is, how much do we want to reveal here? Now, to answer on the research part, we use, and that's the case of many organizations, a combination of obviously keywords, manual research that can use search engine requests, queries, and using other things. At the moment, IFO, we don't use web scraper tool. We are tailoring our research based on looking at specific species in specific marketplace that we have. Then we know they are relevant because of all the source of information coming from the ground, coming from other parts, so that we are tailoring those efforts to make sure we maximize what we have. So it's a combination of everything. an example to highlight why you need to combine everything is, for example, new trends or new modus operandi of people have made people basically to stop putting text in the adverts, but for example, in the videos. So if you only use a keyword search, you won't be able to detect it. And then there is always the question that Sal highlighted and many people highlighted in the chat of whether that's legal or illegal. Most of our research would refer that as suspected adverts that we consider have enough red flags to be considered illegal or are highly likely to be illegal. And then we would only share to law enforcement when there is sufficient criminal clues or intelligence value, plus that is combined to a law enforcement prioritization. So that we're not going to send them some eyeball research if they are at the moment looking on parrots. And on the second question on if people, so either citizens, scientists, or CSOs or anyone can contribute, we are always happy to receive any feedback, whether through the mailing, like the one on the website, or for the people here, feel free to reach out to us. We are always looking at them, but we are not always acting on them. So usually the answer we will have, especially for individual people, is, especially on the platform, to not share it, to not report it, to not interact with it, because otherwise it would feed the algorithm to make the algorithm display more and more adverts like that. But they are always welcome to send information that we will then completely anonymize and act or not on it. If we don't act on it, we destroy it. And that's a little bit the same with, I know there are many organizations also in the chats. That's also how we operate. And we're happy to send information, just act as a messenger, get out of the way, and just make sure the right people have the right information so that they can act on it if it's worth acting on it.
Great, thank you very much, Lionel. Jose, do you want to add anything in terms of the data collection, as well as, you know, citizens or scientists wanting to report suspected illegal trades?
Yeah, let me answer the second question first. Yes, we do get a lot of information from general public. I don't even call them citizen scientists. I call them concerned people. A lot of youngsters send us as simple as a WhatsApp message or an email telling us that there is illegal wildlife trade or suspected illegal wildlife trade happening, and questions regarding that. So that help us to, you know, follow these trails. So that's a great way of understanding what is happening. So the more people are sensitized, the more people partner and you know, inform us about the illegal wildlife trade, it is great. Because I still believe, I think I'm still old school, I still believe that a pair of eyes are better because they can detect things beyond keywords and ads. Now that is taking us to the first question about keywords and other things. There are a number of things. Keywords are the old things, but the keywords are also evolving into emojis and sometimes images. So the traders also keeping an eye on what is happening on the law enforcement side. Fortunately or unfortunately, we are part of some of these suspected groups, and I get to see the conversations, what is happening there. So whenever somebody is busted, we see the interesting conversations that, you know, when you try to sell things, I mean, sometimes they use scientific names of animals, short forms of animals. There are code words for products. So we need to know a lot of things about the trade. For example, what is pangolin scales known in a regional language? So how it is traded within certain communities. So we need to know all these specific words to search keywords. And I don't say that we are yet to go to the dark web in search of goods. We are already getting a lot in the surface web and in social media sites, and we are yet to, you know, we don't need to go to the dark web because the trade is happening in the open web. So we have to evolve our keywords or search and find mechanisms as the trade progresses, because nowadays it is not just listings, but there are other methods which are used, which again Lionel told. So that's my answer.
Great, thank you. Sal, before we close this discussion, I just want to come to you for any final thoughts or reflections. I mean, I've seen you've been responding to quite a lot of the questions around, you know, what's legal, what's illegal, depending on the jurisdictions. But yeah, if there's anything else that you'd like to add, I just want to give you the opportunity to do it now.
Yeah, thank you, Then. I think I'd like to just add that relationships are key here. The relationship between all the organizations that we've mentioned that are involved in looking at this trade online, trying to address this trade online, and our law enforcement partners, our law enforcement agencies involved. It's just key to have those discussions with them to figure out what their priorities are, what their capabilities are, what they need from you to support their efforts, and hopefully some of this information that is being collected does become meaningful subsequent investigations, resulting in trying to change, like I said, that dynamic of making this a riskier undertaking by illegal traders.
Great. Thank you so much. Thanks, everybody. Unfortunately, we've run out of time for this particular panel discussion and the Q&A, and we'd have to close it. Can we just give a virtual round of applause to all of our excellent speakers, including the 3 panelists in front of you? And thank you again. Now, before we move on to the second part of today's webinar, I'm just going to talk briefly about a call for applications that's currently open under Amplifying Grants. And the deadline is at the 18th of October. I understand there should be a QR code of some sort or some details for... Yes, there you go. That's the Amplifying Grants. If you could scan it, it will take you and give you the information that you need. And these grants are actually specifically designed to fund initiatives that combat illicit wildlife trade and timber trafficking. And they aim to address critical challenges such as gap in law enforcement integration, overcoming institutional and political barriers when it comes to data sharing, and of course, supporting innovative solutions. Now, law enforcement agencies, academia, and non-governmental organizations are all invited to apply. Let me also just add that we're going to try and answer as many questions as possible in the Q&A box. So if we didn't get to you during the live event, don't worry. The rest of the teams are trying to answer them, online. Now, we're going to move on to the second part of today's event, which touches on the Ecosolve's corruption and communities components. And we're going to have 2 panel discussions focusing on different parts of the world, as well as a short video. But first, let me set the scene, right? We have heard today, and we all know already, being part of this world, that corruption is a systemic enabler when it comes to organized environmental crime, right? It takes place at every step of the supply chain, and it goes all the way from the lowest rungs of the ladder to the very elite. And it can be so damaging because it creates political instability and entrenches patronage systems and elite captures of democratic institutions. And of course, when corruption becomes systematically embedded, it makes it all the more challenging to tackle the core drivers of environmental crime and to enforce regulations. So Ecosolve is seeking to expose corruption that drives environmental crime. And part of it is by publishing investigative reports that uncover how corruption works and increases the risk and cost for elites who engage in this activity. So in this session, we're going to be discussing different ways of how corruption can be exposed and how to create change from the bottom up. We will be hearing from people who are working on the front lines that deal with corruption in their daily work and the challenges that they face. And to kick this off, we're going to have our second panel discussion, which is focusing on experiences from Africa. We're going to be hearing from 3 very diverse speakers about their experiences and insights when it comes to exposing corruption. I'm going to introduce them to you again in alphabetical order. We have Adams Kasinga, who is a conservationist and a wildlife criminal investigator from the Democratic Republic of Congo. We have Julian Redemeyer, Director of the Civil Society Observatory of Illicit Economies in East and Southern Africa at the Global Initiative, and Ofria Drury, a photojournalist and activist who has also founded an NGO that works to strengthen wildlife prosecution cases. And I'm now going to hand over the moderator reins into the very capable hands of Julian. Julian, all yours.
Thanks so much. It's a pleasure to be here today with 2 such august people who've been working on on the ground for many years, confronting these very issues. I mean, let me start very quickly with Adams. You began your career. In fact, I mean, it's a fascinating background story, but you pretty much began your career in journalism. Then you eventually moved into the business world, and then finally left that to set up Conserve Congo. What have been some of the challenges that you've encountered in dealing with, corruption on the ground, the way that corruption leaches into societies and communities, and has a real impact on efforts to try and counter environmental crime more broadly and illegal wildlife trade?
Thank you very much, Julian. So corruption, as we speak of it, especially in Africa, we tend to detach it from the main component that brings and facilitates corruption, which is a lack of good governance. And sometimes it becomes very difficult to only talk of corruption without highlighting that it is mainly government's responsibility to address such issues, because when we talk of corruption, we do not meet between community members. It's usually with somebody with authority who's going to facilitate it. And in our case, because I'm going to speak about the DRC where I am from, and even though the trends in corruption across Africa seem to be similar, sometimes there are little nuances from country to the other. And some of the challenges that we face include, but not limited to, risk to investigators, for instance. And you've got journalists, you've got activists who are met with a very powerful violence and threats on a daily basis. In the DRC, for instance, those who dare to speak, they find either themselves in prison or they are killed. And therefore, it dampens the spirit of other whistleblowers, because they think, why should I take the risk to die or to go to prison? Whereas I've got no other support from elsewhere. And it turns out to be a riskier business than it could turn the things around. And of course, corruption, it is the cornerstone on which criminal activities are built, especially wildlife trafficking. And it has become the greasing mechanism for the trafficking mechanism. And it leaves sometimes a sour taste in the mouth, especially when it comes to ordinary citizens. It creates a public apathy, whereby they would say, why would you snitch on somebody else? Because criminals have this tendency of being notorious in their own communities. Sometimes they play the game of Robin de Bois, where they do little charitable acts within their communities. And therefore, the community, not being dependent on government, for instance, they tend to be dependent on such individuals. And therefore, whistleblowing becomes almost impossible. And that there is also a challenge, like, for instance, of database. We are working in a very dispersed order. Normally, our efforts are supposed to be combined and channeled in a way that we have the common goal. But sometimes when it's about time to do that, government shuts down. And they say, wait a minute, we want to know who else you are investigating. In the DRC, for instance, even if you had authority from the court, you cannot access certain information, including cyber information such as telecommunications, records, and so on. And that was done on purpose, because the people who are afraid to be investigated are people with authority and power. And once they shut that channel, they are not just protecting themselves, but they're also protecting other potential criminals from the community. And therefore, it becomes very difficult to access certain information. There is also the problem of red tape and bureaucracy, where a whistleblower will be sent from pillar to post. There is no safe mechanism of sharing information, analyzing it, and eventually turning it into an intel information to which law enforcement can act. So when you go to government, they will tell you these statistics. When you come to non-governmental organizations, they give you something else, and it creates confusion because that is the main aim behind that. So the red tape is too long, and there is a risk of leaking the information before the actual operation even happens. And of course, corruption and collusion within law enforcement, within government, the same very people we entrust our wildlife with, they are the same people who turn against their own word, and they facilitate illicit activities. And therefore, we coming from the community-based organizations, we are found between a hammer and a hard place. So this side, we're being chased by criminals, and the very same people that we think are partners, they can easily sell you out. And of course, we do have some legal barriers. Within the legal framework of law enforcement in the DRC, we do have one of the best written legal framework. But the application sometimes is a challenge because, for instance, it gives you between 1 and 10 years for a wildlife crime in the DRC. However, it opens another little path where they say you could pay between $1,000 and $100,000 fine. And that is not specific in which cases. So it remains at the discretion of the judge as to what is going to happen. And when you go to our courts and tribunals, there is no mechanism or system in place on how these fines are paid, which are usually paid in cash, and there is no documentation that you can show for it. So what they would refer to as a fine, those fines do not go into government coffers. They end up going into individual pockets. And because corruption goes from the bottom up, there is no way you can report that. And even if you did report, they will just show from face value that they're really worried and that they could do something about it. But instead, they will go and tell the same individual that you are trying to blow the whistle on that, hey, it's Adams who did that. And if
absolutely
not going through, you already exposed. And therefore, people are very reluctant. The same legal frame does not issue any form of protection for whistleblowers. So now, what would be the interest of you blowing the whistle on somebody powerful who could potentially kill you? And when that happens, you're going to be found on your own and nobody else is going to intervene. Or maybe if they do, the intervention will come a little too late.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is the challenge, just bringing in Ophir Drory, who has also been working on these issues for many years. We worked together a couple of years ago on an investigation, but it's something that you've been dealing with in a number of countries, first with Lager and then more recently through the Eagle network. These are common stories. What Adam's saying here is that you may have good laws on the books, but it's the implementation where it falls down. How do you go about dealing with, with some of these issues around corruption, the impact that has on communities, the impact that has on wildlife crime, and the challenges that comes with that?
Thanks, Julian. I think that, when we talk about reporting about corruption, denouncing corruption, exposure reporting, in our context, public opinion is not an effective tool to bring about a change. So instead, in many ways, when the public is hearing again about a corrupt act in any way, and see that nothing has happened about it, whether it is a minister, whether it is a public official, whether it is a big scandal, when they see nothing happens, it only reinforces that notion that we can't fight corruption. Then you have this kind of notion that DRC is DRC, Senegal is Senegal. Okay, that means that basically people are saying, no, our realities are not changing. Okay, so in a way, denunciation sometimes have even a negative impact. And so our take is that if you want to change reality, you just have to fight and change it. And that's the activist approach here, which is intercepting and combating corruption throughout the entire chain, from start to finish, the entire enforcement and legal systems, from carrying undercover investigations that are independent to actually supervising and managing the arrest operations in the field and fighting corruption in the field, to following up those cases in court through private prosecutions, through lawyers that are actually following up those cases and running and guarding the offices, seeing where bribing is actually taking place, intercepting it, and this continues up to the penitentiary systems. So even monitoring the jail systems and seeing that actually those who are supposed to be in jail are actually in jail, and many times they are not. Our statistics of corruption are deriving not out of denunciation or observing it, but out of fighting it effectively. And they are staggering. 85% of all of our arrest operations with governments, we intercept corruption. 85%. Imagine how dysfunctional is an enforcement system that 85% of the time does not produce enforcement. That is staggering statistics and sobering. And in court, it's not much better. 80% of our cases, we can tell you who was trying to bribe who was trying to negotiate or influence peddle for their cases. So these are staggering statistics that actually show the corrosive effect of corruption on enforcement and legal systems. So in order to do that, we're not a watchdog group. We're not denouncing corruption. We're corruption fighters. We have to intercept and fight it in real time. There's nobody else to say there is corruption out there in such systems. That is not how change is brought about. And I think that some of the obstacles we have. So first of all, corruption is not an obstacle for us. It's actually our raison d'être. This is why we exist. We carry undercover investigations, following up the arrest operations, legal follow-up, private prosecutions, including the penitentiary systems. The use of the media and the use of actually informing the public is not about the fact that there is corruption, and not about the fact that there is crime. That doesn't bring a change at all. But it is about maximizing the deterrent value of the effective enforcement and prosecutions. And that's how we use that about.
Yeah, I mean, I think and possibly if both of you could address this a bit. I think it's a question of there's no single answer here. You've got to be determined. You've got to keep going. You've got to not give way in the face of corruption, but you have to use as many tools as you have in the toolkit. So that can be from sort of more journalistic exposés, or the kind of reporting that various organizations, including ours at the Global Initiative, do, where you can try and expose high-level actors and keep the pressure on. But it's also about doing the on-the-ground work and keeping that momentum going, building the partnerships, building the networks that can really take that information forward, particularly in cases when you're working in countries where there's a level of disinterest or a level of inaction from the law enforcement agency that you would normally turn to. Ophir, maybe you, and then Adams.
Yeah, well, I think that in the end, our message is that it's not rocket science. We managed to get more than 3,000 major traffickers behind bars. Many of them are high officials, from army captains to colonels, to police officers and commissioners, to wildlife officials, up to a director of wildlife in charge of all the wildlife in his country, put in jail, to a secretary general, deputy minister, who was proved to be the biggest trafficker in the country. we have to remember that the officials who are especially interested in protecting wildlife, like cite as focal points. It's great that Adams is here because there are problems in so many different countries. But the way we put the one in Guinea in jail is the only effective way to do that, because the more the officials have the ability to protect wildlife, they have the ability also to destroy it. These are people who are in great positions to be the best traffickers of their countries, which many times they are. And putting them in jail proved that. So if we need more data, I would say we need to get more results. And this is the hard data that we have. I just want to say one more word about another obstacle we have in the fight against corruption before Adams continue to talk, is that one of the biggest problems we have in developing anti-corruption is that in many ways is the approach of the capacity building. So if you see, even in the report that we have now that Nina was presenting, you could see that what we have as recommendations, they don't come out of data. They come up with a hidden assumption, okay, that what we're lacking for is lack of personnel and lack of finance. These are the words, okay? This is very typical for us. And I think that our message here is, from the anti-corruption and from a governance point of view, is that when all you have is the capacity building hammer, every problem you see looks like a capacity problem. So that's where you have many hidden kind of assumptions that are, for us, very harmful in trying to look at corruption issues as the biggest problems that we have out there by far.
Yeah, thanks. Final word to Adams.
Great. So yes, I agree with what Ophira said, but also I believe that to be able to address these issues is going to take us forever, because like I said, it's a very complex situation, which sometimes seems to be abstract and that the average person doesn't understand. But the more capacity we could have, the better we can be able to address this. And that's the reason why activists and journalists are targeted, because these are the people better positioned and placed not only to detect, but also to report. And therefore, we as wildlife activists have got to do both works as an activist, but also as informing, as a journalist. But the more we can be, the better. But the main issue is to be able to increase awareness, to make people understand that the same way corruption is affecting wildlife today, tomorrow is going to affect their livelihood, and the conditions under which they live emanates from that fact that funding, which is supposed to build hospitals and schools, it does something else, and therefore it perpetuates this almost a second nature that sometimes people are not even afraid to talk about corruption. They give it different names. In French, they even call it pourboire. You go to get your passport downtown, it costs $150, but you end up paying $250. And nobody has ever questioned why do we pay $250 in order of paying $150? Because it has become normal. It is an erosion that is eroding our society on a daily basis, and it requires much more than just capacity. I believe policy change. We need to go into our own constituency. We need to talk to the people that we vote into parliament. How can you assist us? But like I said, even they themselves, it's just voting, you get an envelope. You vote, you get an envelope. And therefore, issues such as wildlife protection is not a priority to them. They want to give priority to industries where they can be able to eat and to feed their superiors. So it is a case of irresponsibility, mainly on the government part. When you've got ministers and presidents saying, I didn't know that existed. I think under other skies, when you say I didn't know, it means I quit. But in our country, it's not the case. Therefore, we're going to continue creating awareness, but also trying to change some of these policies, to have policies which better protect whistleblowers, policies which protect wildlife. But also there is a part of corporate accountability. We should start naming and shaming names, especially of companies such as airlines, transportation companies, which are involved in this trade, especially once there is any form of corruption detected.
Let me add a bit until Julian is coming back to us. Let me add a bit about the companies. And I think indeed in many of the times that we have we have exports, especially of live animals, we can see as well complicity within the airline companies. So that is definitely something that that exists.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Adams, Ophir, and Julian, for all of your insights, tackling this very knotty but very important issue around corruption and how some of our perhaps simplistic, assumptions might actually be more harmful than helpful. Thank you very much again. Now, before we start the third and final panel discussion, we're going to watch another short video about a community dialogue held in Brazil as part of Ecosolve's community engagement efforts. Now, the aim of these dialogues is actually to understand the challenges that are being faced by people who are living in these biodiverse hotspots, and also to identify initiatives that can sort of prevent environmental crime and protect the environment. Again, we apologize in advance if the video is a little bit grainy. We do have higher res versions of it on the website. Can we have the video, please?
Nós viemos aqui para conversar com os meus parentes, porque a gente falar sobre isso com nossa necessidade, nosso costume, é isso que é muito importante para nós vir aqui para unir sobre isso.
Essa relação que as pessoas têm com esse lugar, com o seu território, se transformando elas mesmas guardiãs, né, da cultura, da história desse lugar, protege. E as reservas extrativistas e essas populações se apresentam como uma fronteira ao crime ambiental, ao desmatamento, né, à invasão, à venda ilegal de terra.
Hoje eu vivo sofrendo ameaças diretas, mas infelizmente a gente não pode parar. É um direito à vida. É um direito que os meus filhos têm, que os meus netos têm, que o meu povo tem, que nós temos. E quando a gente entende que é um direito, a gente vai à luta.
Nós chegamos à compreensão de que o racismo, o colonialismo, o autoritarismo, eles são formas impositivas de aniquilação cultural.
Uma das principais atividades que os núcleos têm feito é a autogovernança do território, que implica em que eles estabeleçam dentro de um território redes de comunicação e de denúncia, em que eles apresentam aos órgãos estaduais e federais os crimes que eles localizam que estão ameaçando o território.
Então é muito importante e necessário que a gente esteja conectados, que nós saibamos o que um e o outro passa e principalmente que nós tenhamos esse apoio. Apoio principalmente para a manutenção da vida.
Thank you very much. And that video is just the perfect segue for our third and final panel discussion, which is going to be talking about, what is happening on the ground. And we have two representatives of community initiatives from Latin America. First, we have Bruno Moraes, who is a representative of the Instituto Sucupira. And we have Claudelis dos Santos, coordinator of the Instituto Z. Claudio and Maria. You've also probably seen Claudelis in the video in the dialogue. Bruno, Claudelis, welcome. The first question I have is the same for both of you. Could you both briefly share the community-led initiatives that you are involved in the Amazon region of Brazil? Bruno, can I start with you first?
Eu vou aproveitar para poder falar em português, já que a gente tem tradução. Bom, pessoal, bom dia para todo mundo. Bom dia para quem for de bom dia. Boa tarde para quem estiver na parte da tarde. Meu nome é Bruno, eu sou advogado, eu sou antropólogo. Eu queria agradecer a GI-TOC pela oportunidade de estar aqui compartilhando esse espaço com vocês e conversando sobre as iniciativas que a gente está tentando tocar aqui pelo Instituto Sucupira. O Instituto Sucupira é uma organização bastante pequena, que foi feita como uma organização de apoio às comunidades locais, uma organização, uma espécie de think and do tank. É um espaço que a gente reflete, em que professores universitários, pesquisadores, ativistas ambientais, defensores de direitos humanos refletem a respeito das condições das comunidades indígenas, não indígenas. E só um segundo que estou pedindo para confirmar a minha linguagem que eu estou dizendo aqui. Eu vou dizer que eu estou falando em português. E as comunidades indígenas, não indígenas, ribeirinhas, os povos e comunidades tradicionais, em interface com a ciência e com a universidade. Eu fui professor universitário na Universidade Federal do Oeste do Pará, em Santarém, e eu queria começar dizendo de que eu não falo, não sou representante de comunidade, né, ou de iniciativa de base comunitária. Assim, o Instituto Sucupira é uma organização de apoio às comunidades que estão na linha de frente do combate ao crime organizado ambiental e aos danos ambientais que essas comunidades estão sofrendo por ali. A gente tem pequenos projetos de apoio a essas pesquisadores, ativistas de direitos humanos, que fazem uma intermediação e facilitam a chegada de financiamento direto para essas comunidades. E eu acho que eu poderia compartilhar duas experiências, né? Como advogado e como antropólogo, eu trabalho já há algum tempo com os povos Xavante do leste do estado do Mato Grosso, né? Os povos Xavante são um povo indígena de relativamente recente contato com a sociedade nacional, e as terras deles foram cercadas por soja, pelas plantações de soja, pela abertura de grandes fazendas de gado no oeste do Mato Grosso. E a gente tem trabalhado já nos últimos 10 anos, mais de 10 anos, trabalhando com iniciativas de organização comunitária desses povos para poder criar instrumentos de monitoramento territorial, de monitoramento via satélite, de expedições para reconhecimento do território que está sofrendo essa pressão do entorno. Um dos principais problemas do Xavante foi que, durante o governo Bolsonaro, uma iniciativa de diferentes atores políticos que estavam vinculados à produção de soja, ao agronegócio, eles assediaram o Xavante de uma terra indígena específica, que é a terra indígena Sangradouro Volta Grande, e juntos levaram à destruição, um desmatamento de 2.000 hectares de terra dentro do território, né? Essa situação ela não só foi um dano ambiental bastante significativo para um povo que já está em situação bastante vulnerável. Os Xavantes são um povo que o seu sistema alimentar é meio baseado na caça e na coleta. E essa iniciativa que juntou, né, atores políticos externos à comunidade para poder fazer um desmatamento não só colocou em risco esse sistema alimentar, como também desestruturou e destruiu das coisas que eu acho mais essenciais, né, mais fundamentais na hora de se pensar o combate ao crime organizado, não só no Brasil, mas no mundo todo, o combate ao crime organizado ambiental, né, socioambiental. O que eu acho que é esse ponto importante é o que a gente chama de tecnologias comunitárias. A gente conversa muito sobre satélite, muito sobre monitoramento de drone, sobre análise de dados, mas a gente precisa lembrar também de que as comunidades, e eu acho que a Claudice até pode conversar um pouco melhor a respeito disso, as comunidades são as que detêm as principais tecnologias, né, de monitoramento territorial e de luta contra o crime organizado, contra o desmatamento, a grilagem de terra, o tráfico de animais silvestres que foram colocados por aqui, a partir das experiências africanas que foram discutidas aqui antes de mim, e brasileiras também. Então, a gente tem trabalhado, né, com o Xavante nesse sentido, para poder tentar organizar a associação de base comunitária deles, para poder estimular esse processo de retomada dessas tecnologias sociais que permitam eles andar pelos territórios, a fazer manejo integrado do fogo, a voltar a fazer caça e coleta nas suas terras, né? Então, a gente tem fortalecido as estruturas tradicionais, as formas rituais dessas comunidades, ao mesmo tempo que a gente tem tabulado dados a respeito dessa pressão, em especial desse caso de desmatamento de 2.000 hectares no interior da terra. Esse caso de desmatamento, a gente realizou, durante o ano passado, toda uma investigação em torno dele, que envolveu um levantamento de informações documentais, não só no governo, em órgãos públicos, mas também a partir de whistleblowers, a partir de gente que vazou informações para a gente. A gente conseguiu uma gravação de uma reunião que foi capitaneada por altos oficiais do governo, em que eles discutiam o processo de arrendamento da terra. A gente conseguiu, a partir de um processo de monitoramento territorial, identificar os fazendeiros, né, e as pessoas que estavam por trás desse arrendamento ilegal da terra chavante para a produção de soja. E algumas medidas legais foram disparadas a partir disso. Os processos e as investigações ainda estão em andamento, então eu não consigo compartilhar aqui com vocês informações detalhadas a respeito disso, mas houve e há uma iniciativa em aberto de responsabilidade desses atores. Uma outra iniciativa que eu acho que eu poderia compartilhar com vocês é uma iniciativa centrada numa certa região da Amazônia. Eu não posso dizer a respeito de qual é. Eu acho que talvez a Claudelice vai conseguir identificar, assim, mas tem uma certa região da Amazônia onde você tem a operação de uma grande multinacional do mercado de grãos mundial, e a gente tentou, a partir de uma iniciativa de mobilização comunitária e de envolvimento de jornalistas, pesquisadores, investigadores, tentar identificar uma organização criminosa que está plantando soja dentro dessa terra indígena, está desmatando essa terra indígena para poder plantar soja, colocando pressão sobre as comunidades, criando ameaças contra os defensores ambientais dessa comunidade e usando essa trader internacional, que é uma das maiores, das gigantes do setor, para poder integralizar. O que eu estou chamando de integralizar é um processo bastante característico dos crimes de colarinho branco, né? Que é de que quando você mistura um produto, né, um bem que tem uma origem ilegal, um bem que tem origem legal, e você consegue misturar essas duas coisas e receber, e integralizar aquilo como se fosse uma coisa completamente proveniente de uma atividade econômica legal, né? É o mesmo processo, o mesmo tipo de operação criminosa que existe no tráfico de drogas, no tráfico de animais silvestres, e a gente estava tentando criar e demonstrar como que esse argumento funciona, ou como que ele se produz na prática a partir da experiência dessa comunidade especificamente. Eu tinha trazido uma série de informações de análise de dados sobre a exploração de soja, mas o nosso tempo aqui é bastante reduzido e outras pessoas já conversaram a respeito de tabulação de dados, as dificuldades que a gente tem a respeito disso antes de mim. Então, eu vou tentar meio pular essa parte, mas eu gostaria de pelo menos mostrar para vocês as imagens da comunidade, de como que essa comunidade está organizada no entorno desses campos de soja, da expansão desses campos de soja na Amazônia. Eu vou pedir licença para poder mostrar a minha tela, e não é uma apresentação de PowerPoint, são só apresentações de imagens. Deixa eu ver se eu consigo colocar e organizá-las por aqui. Eu acho que eu talvez tenha que mudar aqui, né? Vocês estão conseguindo ver a tela por inteira, eu imagino? Sim, estão conseguindo ver? Bom, esse é um campo de soja dentro de uma comunidade indígena, da comunidade indígena que a gente está referenciando. Eu não vou dizer o nome da comunidade, nem mostrar nenhum mapa, nem a geografia do local, porque recentemente tiveram episódios de violência lá. Essa investigação é uma investigação que ainda está em andamento. A gente vai provavelmente fazer a segunda pernada dessa investigação no segundo semestre, agora no final desse ano, no começo do ano que vem, que é quando vem a próxima safra de soja, né? As safras de sojas nessa região da Amazônia, elas costumam acontecer entre fevereiro até abril. Então, as mobilizações e as organizações dos fazendeiros para poder fazer a safra de soja estão começando por agora. Como o tempo também está um pouco maluco, né, por causa das mudanças climáticas, é possível que esse calendário fique um pouco irregular. Mas a gente pretende acompanhar mais uma safra de soja dessa região para poder conseguir fazer o rastreio e o mapeamento de para onde essa soja está indo, de como que esses fazendeiros, né, de como esses plantadores de soja estão, de fato, organizados criminalmente para poder produzir grilagem de terra. Talvez o tradutor tenha alguma dificuldade com esse termo. Grilagem de terra, acho que a melhor tradução em inglês é land grabbing.
Bruno, do you want to put it into a slide? Because at the moment we're seeing the speaker's view. And if you don't mind moving on a little bit quicker, because we also need to listen to Claudelis and we have quite a few different questions as well.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, so this is the slide.
Yes,
Esse
this
é
is
um,
perfect.
esse,
Thank you.
esse é um campo de soja na Amazônia e é um campo de soja que está circundando a comunidade. Essa comunidade, eu tampei a face das pessoas para poder não expor ninguém aqui, e reiterando também de que eu não falo em nome da comunidade, né? Essa comunidade ela tem um processo de organização própria, as lideranças, os jovens comunitários que estão organizando um processo de monitoramento desse território, eles poderiam ser muito bem eles que estão aqui fazendo essa apresentação, mas eu gostaria de dizer sobre como a gente está tentando apoiar essas iniciativas, estão monitorando o desmatamento do território e estão tentando identificar os impactos da plantação de soja nesse território, né? Essa é a principal fonte de água desse território. Essa fonte de água, ela está contaminada por agrotóxicos. Uma das nossas dificuldades é justamente fazer a testagem dessa água, fazer mapeamento e rastreamento de contaminação por agrotóxicos. Não é uma coisa simples e a gente tem tentado procurar apoios de centros de pesquisa, universidades, laboratórios móveis que podem ajudar a gente nesse sentido. Essa é a operação de soja, de colheita de soja que a gente acompanhou. Vocês podem ver que é um plantio de soja que está sendo feito no meio da floresta, a partir de aberturas de espaço no centro da floresta. A gente, a partir dessa colheita de soja, a gente, junto com as lideranças comunitárias, tentou fazer um rastreamento para poder saber para onde que essa soja estava indo. A gente fez um rastreamento dos caminhões de carregamento, desde os campos de soja até os silos, onde essa soja é armazenada. E veja que na Amazônia, essa é uma coisa que a gente poderia me mostrar na análise de dados muito claramente, de que as grandes operadoras de plantio de soja na Amazônia, elas não detêm silos próprios. Então, a alegação de que a cadeia produtiva delas é sustentável, ela simplesmente é impossível de ser demonstrada, porque os silos particulares, que são os silos intermediários, onde essa soja é armazenada antes da exportação, eles misturam tanto a soja de origem legal com a soja de origem ilegal. Esse silo, por exemplo, e o acompanhamento que a gente fez, demonstrou sobre como essas operações, tanto das áreas desmatadas e embargadas, como das áreas que não são desmatadas, que não foram desmatadas recentemente, né? Elas estão sendo operadas em conjunto, com uma organização criminosa integrada mesmo, né? Coordenada e integrada para poder misturar essa soja, levar essa soja até um determinado porto que fica na Amazônia, no carregamento de navios de carga que vão cruzar posteriormente até a Europa e chegar nos portos de Roterdã. Em especial, o porto de Roterdã é um grande porto receptor de soja, e a partir daquele porto, existem outros portos também, mas esse é o principal, e a partir desse porto, essa soja é distribuída para vários países europeus. A nossa ideia com esse, já estou acabando, a nossa ideia a partir dessa investigação era tentar fazer uma responsabilização direta dos operadores desse sistema, não só dos fazendeiros que estão fazendo essa operação em terreno e estão ameaçando a vida das comunidades, mas também criar capacidades e argumentos jurídicos a partir das leis de obrigação de devida diligência dos compradores europeus dessa soja que é produzida em território indígena, para que eles possam ser responsabilizados, ou pelo menos criar ou tomar iniciativas de criação de medidas de devida diligência mais adequadas que consigam não só monitorar e evitar que esses impactos cheguem nas comunidades, como reparar as comunidades pelos danos provocados a elas. Eu acho que eu vou parar por aqui, são várias outras perguntas, né? Muito obrigado.
Thank you very much. Claudius, can I come to you next? It would be great to hear from you briefly, the initiatives that you're involved in. I do have a follow-up question as well, Claudius, particularly because the work that you do is vital, but is also quite dangerous. So I'd like to hear from you about challenges as well. But if you would be great if you could just first start with describing the initiative that you're involved in. Thank you.
Bom dia a todas as pessoas. Eu sou Claudelice Santo, eu falo desde o Pará, né, aqui na Amazônia brasileira, e eu sou coordenadora de uma organização também pequena chamada Instituto Zé Cláudio Maria. Zé Cláudio e Maria foram dois defensores da natureza e dos direitos humanos que foram assassinados em 2011. Exatamente por fazer denúncia contra a exploração da natureza, contra a violação de direitos humanos aqui no meu estado. Eu sou irmã dele e desde então a gente tomou algumas decisões.
A primeira é não se afastar da luta e do território, porque é exatamente isso que acontece quando essa violência chega muito perto por causa dessas denúncias, né? Eles atacam as lideranças, aqueles que fazem as denúncias de forma muito violenta. E isso acaba enfraquecendo muitas vezes a organicidade local. Por isso que é muito importante o trabalho que o Bruno faz, o trabalho que eu ouvi dos panelistas antes de mim, porque isso empodera as comunidades tradicionais, indígenas, quilombolas, a continuarem a denunciando, porque de fato denunciar esse tipo de violação, seja da natureza, seja das pessoas, isso provoca uma violência, né, muito forte. E aí isso está intrinsecamente ligado à corrupção, isso está ligado à falta de política pública específica, principalmente a um tema, por exemplo, do tráfico, que aí a gente, quando fala tráfico, vem logo à cabeça drogas, mas a gente sabe que tem outros tipos de tráfico dentro dos territórios e um deles, além de animais, é o de poder. Tem uma relação de poder muito forte de empresários, políticos, sujeitos que estão dentro dos órgãos que deveriam fiscalizar e não fiscalizam. Isso enfraquece, isso coloca as comunidades numa situação em que precisa de um apoio muito forte, muito presente, para que continue fazendo as denúncias, né? Então, o Instituto Zé Cláudio Maria, além de fazer esse acompanhamento, tentar incidir junto com várias comunidades aqui na Amazônia, é olhar para a questão da violência quando as comunidades denunciam. E aí é um assunto que a gente trata com muito cuidado, porque envolve a vida individual das pessoas que denunciam, mas também a coletividade. Então, nós, nos últimos anos, temos nos debruçado sobre a questão das denúncias versus proteção e cuidado comunitário e individual também dos sujeitos que fazem as denúncias. Com relação a isso, a gente tem criado mecanismos nosso próprio e não do Programa de Proteção, que é uma política pública que o Brasil tem, o estado do Pará, onde eu vivo, tem um programa de proteção estatal, mas nós não confiamos nesse sistema totalmente, inclusive por causa das corrupções. E nós temos um sistema próprio, né, de cuidado e proteção, incluindo um espaço físico que chamamos de Casa de Respiro da Floresta, onde a gente, além de dar suporte no território, se for o caso, e infelizmente a gente é muito procurado sobre isso, retirada de defensores que são ameaçados, que sofrem atentados, né? Então, a Casa de Respiro faz análise de risco, analisa todas as possibilidades. A última é essa retirada do território pelas ameaças de morte. Aqui no Brasil, essa questão do tráfico, principalmente de animais, ela é pouco falada. Ela quase não é difundida na sociedade sobre a importância de denunciar o tráfico de animais. E quando a gente pensa em tráfico, geralmente a gente pensa as caixinhas separadas. Droga, poder, animais. Mas na Amazônia, isso está tudo muito imbricado, né? Quando os madeireiros vão para explorar uma área, eles não vão para explorar só a madeira. Se tiver animais que estavam numa árvore que caiu, eles vão pegar para traficar, né? Mas também tem organizações criminosas que vão especificamente para pegar rãs, por exemplo. São os sapinhos que nós temos coloridos, né? Então, pensar separadamente enfraquece, né, a formas de denúncia. E principalmente quando a gente tem um país que vem se recuperando de um processo político que fragilizou muito a democracia e também os órgãos que fiscalizam, que criam os aspectos legais para a proteção dos animais e das pessoas, né? Falo dos últimos anos em que Bolsonaro esteve no poder e que praticamente destruiu o IBAMA, que é o órgão que faz essa fiscalização, né? Tanto que quando a gente fala sobre tráfico de animais, a gente olha para a história recente do nosso país, que foi a parte mais forte que se falou sobre tráfico de animais, foi quando uma pessoa de Brasília foi picado por uma naja. A gente nem tem naja no Brasil, é de fora. E aí, quando foi fazer uma investigação sobre isso, encontraram mais 16 espécies na região em que essa pessoa vivia. 8 pessoas foram indiciadas, uma delas era do IBAMA. Né? Então, isso lá em Brasília. Imagine nos rincões da Amazônia, onde esse processo de fiscalização ele quase inexistente, onde houve uma fragilidade muito grande desse órgão, né, governamental durante os governos anteriores. Então, o trabalho que nós fazemos junto às comunidades, não só no sentido de olhar para essas questões de denúncia, mas também dar o apoio jurídico, psicossocial, porque imagina, você é uma pessoa comum que está na sua comunidade, de repente você faz uma denúncia e você vê a sua vida, né, completamente ameaçada por causa de algo que você está querendo proteger e que é um bem comum, é um bem da humanidade. A natureza, né, não humana é um bem da humanidade e que é explorada de uma forma muito vil, e quando você faz essas denúncias, você tem sua vida ameaçada. Então, o trabalho que nós desenvolvemos nesse sentido é essencial, né? E temos uma articulação muito forte entre as comunidades, né? Eu venho de uma comunidade tradicional, perdi meu irmão e minha cunhada por essa situação, e nós sabemos exatamente quando nós somos ameaçados por fazer essas denúncias. Então, é muito importante que fóruns como esse sejam amplamente difundidos, né? Claro, desse modo global, mas também dentro das nossas comunidades. E eu agradeço muito, Ecosolve, por esse convite, porque essa é uma temática que nós falamos entre nós, mas existe, né, uma invisibilidade do tema no nosso país, e é muito importante difundi-lo.
Great, thank you so much for your time, Bruno and Claudelise. Unfortunately, we are running out of time, so I just want to give both of you a very brief opportunity for last thoughts, particularly, if you have any suggestions or recommendations on the kind of changes that you want to see in terms of public policy or attention, so that, this topic takes more attention at a globally, regionally, and nationally. If you could keep your answers very, very brief, I would really appreciate it. Claudelise, would you like to go first?
Sim, eu acredito que para o contexto brasileiro, a gente precisa, sim, eu sei que já tem políticas públicas, mas nós precisamos de políticas públicas mais específicas para a investigação, e aí com o uso da inteligência, seja artificial, seja a comunitária, como a gente já viu esses dois aspectos aqui, mas no sentido de monitorar e investigar. Porque isso sim vai levar a uma cadeia que nós conhecemos, que é ampla, que é grande, que é internacional do tráfico, não só de animais, mas de madeira, de ervas e de conhecimento tradicional.
Enfim, antes de mais nada, muito obrigado pela oportunidade de vir apresentar e compartilhar nossa experiência aqui no Brasil, ainda que seja por um tempo tão curto assim, de uma oportunidade um tempo tão restrito para a gente poder apresentar. E eu só salientaria essa necessidade de se olhar as iniciativas de base comunitária da mesma maneira, gastando o mesmo esforço, a mesma atenção, de que a gente olha para soluções ditas tecnológicas, de análise de dados, o uso de satélite, o uso de grandes bases de dados. Eu sou diretor de uma organização internacional que se chama CCCA, é o Centro para Análise de Crimes Climáticos, ele é baseado na Holanda, que trabalha especificamente com isso. E eu tenho sentido de que, tanto por parte da sociedade civil, como por parte das agências governamentais, em especial da agenda geopolítica que vem do norte global, as iniciativas de base comunitária e as tecnologias que detêm as próprias comunidades para poder fazer o monitoramento do seu território e criar estratégias de resistência ao avanço do crime organizado ambiental, elas não têm recebido a mesma atenção e o mesmo tempo e o mesmo cuidado que as outras iniciativas têm sido olhadas. Então, de que é preciso também descolonizar esse olhar por parte da criminologia ambiental, digamos assim. Muito obrigado.
Thank you very much, both, for all the work that you do despite the challenging circumstances. And, we wish you the best of luck in your continued endeavors. I'm now going to invite Louise again to come to the virtual stage to give the closing remarks before we wrap up this event. Louise?
Thanks, Finn. I started off with a thank you, and I'll finish with an even bigger thank you to everybody for the engagement, for the offers of collaboration, for the challenge. And also, I mean, the questions were fantastic. I've frankly never seen such an amazing range of, as I say, challenging in a really good way and constructive questions. So, and they've been very helpful for us. So thank you, full disclosure. But yeah, I've never seen such a level of really qualified engagement across all of the sections. So big thank you from me to everybody. Amazing panelists. Thanks for coming and for taking your time. I'm not going to take any longer. The one thing I will, just say is that because we didn't get to answer all of the questions, what we've asked is that we have a transcript of the questions shared with us so that we can make sure that we're following up on everything, including all of those wonderful offers of collaboration and stuff. The email's been popped in there a few times, so please do reach out. We're very excited to speak to you, and thank you for your amazing cooperation and engagement. And Finn, thank you very much for your excellent moderation as usual.
Thank you so much, Louise. And I think it's a great point that I think you are tapping into a really important topic that has remained hidden for so long, and when it should be on the center stage, when it should be on the top of our agendas. So thank you to GI-TOC, Ecosolve, for all of that work, and thank you also for joining us today and staying, even though we've sort of ran over time a little bit. It's been my pleasure to moderate this event, and I hope this is just the beginning of the conversation around how to tackle illegal wildlife crime online, and that this is not the end, and that may the work continue, and may the work be fruitful. Thank you so much. Goodbye, and have a great day.